All right, everybody. Thank you very much all for joining us. Thank you for giving us your time today and joining us for this DeceptionGrid webinar, where we're going to be talking about the solution in the cloud environment. For those of you who don't know, TrapX Security has been around for the last 6.5 years. We're backed financially by the world famous Intel, as well as BRM, famous for backing Checkpoint, as well as Opus Liberty and Strategic Cyber Ventures. Our offices are international, going from California to Tel Aviv, from the UK to Mexico, and going strong. In addition, the solution is trusted by many industry leaders in today's world, especially those who have very, very sensitive information in the cloud, and they trust the solution to protect that information. And we're going to show you today how we go ahead and we make that happen. In addition, many thought leaders in the industry have recognized TrapX for their advanced breach detection. There's a Gartner report that TrapX is in for the last 3 years, as well as Frost & Sullivan. And I don't know if many of you guys are aware, but 3 weeks ago, we won the SC Awards event in Europe. We won it back-to-back, year after year, as well as multiple other awards. And as we said before, going strong. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ori Bach, a veteran in cybersecurity and our Vice President of Product. Ori, what do you have for us today?
Thank you very much, Michael, for the kind introduction. So today I want to talk to you about our unique approach to protecting both public and private clouds. I'll touch briefly on the challenges of securing cloud, securing hybrid networks that have both cloud as well as corporate networks, on-premises networks. But just touch on it because where I really want to focus is how do we, TrapX, use the approach of deception in order to provide visibility, in order to detect attacks, in order to do so at scale. So let's first talk about what is this challenge. When we think about cloud, why is it a challenge? So the first thing, it's a challenge because security is a challenge. So the fact that somebody has moved their assets into the cloud, or part of their assets into the cloud, definitely more scalable, and there's a lot of benefits into the adoption of clouds, especially the ability to consume resources at the rate that you want to consume them at a certain point of time. However, while the public cloud providers do provide some level of security, it is a mutual responsibility model, meaning that it is not a turnkey security service where, by the fact that you put sensitive data in the cloud, somebody else needs to secure it. It is actually still the responsibility of the enterprise using public cloud services, definitely, of course, private cloud, to still secure certain elements, certain very important elements of the cloud. And that is the main challenge. So first of all, because security is a challenge, security in cloud obviously would be a challenge. However, there are additional problems that are unique into the cloud environment. And the first one is that it may not be a pure cloud environment. Maybe an environment where some of the activity is happening within a corporate network. There is some type of connectivity between that network and other assets in the cloud. A good example of that would be a VPN connection. So if you have some kind of processing power in the cloud, or some type of servers in the cloud, or applications in the cloud, but you have the people that are managing them are still sitting within the corporate network and can access them via VPN, then the challenge is not just purely cloud, it's how do I secure both networks? A breach into one would be a breach into both. Obviously, the corporate network would be a logical, where your users are, would be a logical point of breach. But also, if it's not a user, just in terms of there are some assets sitting somewhere in the world outside of the cloud, talking to an application in the cloud, then that would be the attack vector. So it's not a pure cloud security problem, but a hybrid security problem. In addition, another problem that's fairly unique to the cloud is rapidly changing in terms of its ability to scale out and scale down. Obviously, corporate networks, campus networks change also, but the rate is more controlled and may involve some kind of process where the security team is consulted. However, the cloud just could be, in terms of availability, could balloon to hundreds of new instances and then shrink down to just a few. So whatever method being used to monitor and secure that environment also needs to be scalable in itself, meaning the ability to deploy very rapidly meaning seconds, automatically without human intervention ideally, and then scale down if those instances of the cloud are being scaled out. And the final challenge is it does not make any sense for those of you who have made huge investments in securing their enterprise to say, okay, all of those investments will be completely separate than what I'm doing for the cloud. I'm going to have a whole new team, a whole new set of solutions, and those will not talk to one another. It doesn't make sense from a security perspective because attacks could span the corporate network and the cloud, as I mentioned before. But more so, it doesn't really make sense to make this huge, to throw away this huge investment and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to use anything that I've done before, so I need my SIEM in the cloud and I need my application monitoring in the cloud. So all of that will be a duplicate investment that I will need to build from scratch. So we need to be able to, in some way, integrate securing the cloud into the overall security program. Ultimately, this is not only a theoretical problem or not just a problem of process, but a real-life problem of attacks. IBM actually recently did an interesting report, their Threat Intelligence Index for 2018. Relatively speaking, cloud has actually been the area where there's been the largest increase in attacks. And the reason for that is very simple. It's one of the largest growing areas in IT in general, right? So as more sensitive assets move to the cloud, as the cloud becomes bigger, and it is constantly becoming bigger, there is this constant migration of computing power from on-premises into the cloud. It becomes a bigger target just in terms of scale or in terms of data that's out there for the bad guys, and therefore you're seeing this huge increase, 424% in attacks. So this is something that we need to be worried about and not just do because we're looking to follow some process. Let's talk about, all right, so if this is a big problem, how well are we doing as an industry in terms of tackling it? There's an interesting survey that Benson did for Palo Alto, and the bottom line is not very good. We're not, we, meaning the security ecosystem, is still not doing a good enough job catching up to the business adoption of cloud computing. In general, I know maybe some are doing better, some may feel they're doing worse, but statistically 70% of people surveyed said that the business is adopting cloud, but they don't feel that they're really internalizing or doing enough in order to secure what they're putting out there. And what they're putting in the cloud is typically some of the most sensitive data, some of the most sensitive infrastructure out there, and that would have very catastrophic, or if not catastrophic, very problematic results if indeed breached. Only 1 in 10 was willing to say that the way that they meet insecurity across the enterprise networks and the cloud is consistent. So that's almost non-existent. And finally, the level of confidence is still relatively small. Less than half felt that what they're putting out there in the cloud is secure, even in the most sensitive areas that you would expect that they would be the most secure, like finance. So overall indicative, again, some are doing better, some are doing worse, but overall we're still in catch-up mode as security is trying to tackle with this trend concept of the migration into the cloud. One of the interesting things that we're seeing is that there is a huge amount of one of the most mundane type of problems, which is misconfiguration. So one of the most prevalent types of problems out there, it's not a super sophisticated attack, it's not a zero-day, it's the fact that somebody misconfigured something in the cloud. For instance, the Mexican election authority, due to misconfiguration, actually exposed the database with voter personal identifying information There were a number of other instances, so it's simple enough as the fact, just because it's a simple configuration, rather to have an asset in the cloud be only accessible to the enterprise or accessible from the internet. Those misconfigurations happen. So even a fairly mundane type of threat is actually happening quite a lot and causing very problematic results. Let's map out what the various problems are in order to explain what the TrapX solution is. So first of all, as I mentioned a minute ago, it could be a direct attack against the cloud. If any aspect of my cloud estate is exposed to the internet, it can be attacked, and this could be because I've misconfigured something, and therefore something that is supposed to be internal, data that's supposed to be internal is becoming external. It could be that I've not done that. However, I've got an application out there. Again, the responsibility for many of those things is not for the cloud provider, but for the enterprise. I've put some application out there that has a vulnerability. Could be a known vulnerability that I'm not patched for, or it could be an unknown vulnerability, in essence, 0 days. So the same type of problem that exists in general also exists in the cloud. Outside of exploiting the cloud itself, certain type of architectures mean that I'm putting stuff out there in the cloud. Either my customers or my vendors have some kind of access into it. So a breach into the supply chain would be a breach into the cloud. One of the instances that I always like to talk about is one of the Sony breaches. Actually started with an outsourcer of Sony that was breached, and from there the attackers were able to move into Sony's actual network. So it's not just about what you're doing; it's also about what people are you providing access to. And finally, there's this fact that a breach into the perimeter, by definition, would be a breach into the cloud. If VPN access is out there, or if there's some kind of connectivity between your network and the cloud, which would make sense in that somebody needs to manage the cloud. So, in the minimum, maybe your DevOps teams have that access, but many times, lots are users that are actually accessing applications. Servers that may be talking to assets in the cloud. So any kind of compromised user, your classical phishing attack, could actually end up being a compromise, an attack against the cloud. Any insider that has some level of access in the cloud could use that in order to get data out of the cloud, to essentially to perform a data breach, as well as any kind of malware or compromised assets within your network that potentially has that access could perform that breach. That's a lot of attack surface to cover. Those are just the main use cases. There are other problems that could occur. And I'm not even talking about the fact, what happens if the cloud providers themselves are breached. So this would be hopefully a very rare thing, but also something that could happen. Because there's so much attack surface out there, because there's really not a lot of penalty for failed attack, right? Attackers just keep trying, more spear phishing emails, more exploits, just expose anything out there into the internet, cloud or not cloud, and we do that from time to time here at TrapX, and you get bombarded by bots and other types of exploits and Eternal Blue and things like Mirai. And the reason that they're doing that, just generically against any kind of asset that's exposed over the internet, because it doesn't cost them anything. Okay, so if they're not successful, they're not successful, and if they're successful, that's great. In fact, because it doesn't really cost a lot to attempt to attack somebody, you can be successful only 0.01% of the time and still have a good ROI as a hacker, as an attacker, as a cyber gang, as a state-level actor to your efforts. If you're using enough automation tools, you can just continually bomb away, and when you get a hit, you get a hit. Unfortunately, this is where I think a lot of enterprises are being caught off guard, because one of two things happen once you have a breach. The one thing that could happen, which is not great but not horrible, All right, your perimeter has been breached. In this case, somebody got into your cloud and you immediately knew something about it. You have some capability to have internal visibility, meaning you're not just relying on the fact that you would never be breached, the cloud will never be breached. You're assuming that you would be able to stop the majority of attacks at the edge. However, you assume that some, hopefully rare scenarios, would get in, and you're looking to also get visibility and detect those instances. So this internal visibility would mean that you have a breach, or you immediately have an understanding of that breach, and it doesn't matter if it's a misconfiguration or a very sophisticated attack, it's immediately detected. You've got good information regarding what happened, where it happened, you plug the hole, kick the bad guys out, and resume normal operations. So not great because you had a breach, but not horrible because you haven't lost any data and you were able to plug that hole. Unfortunately, that's really not how it usually turns out. On average, it takes more than 6 months for enterprises to identify that they have a data breach. And those first, days, hours, days, weeks, months, this is where the damage piles up. This is where the bad guys can really get all the valuable data out. Move from the initial point of breach laterally to hit whatever high-value asset that they're looking for. Maintain persistency. This means that the response to the incident is going to become very long because it's going to be very hard to clean all the assets. This is really what we talk about when we say the value of internal visibility, the value of understanding where lateral movement happens, is the difference between a breach that happens but has no significant cost outside of the operations of immediately responding to the incident and addressing whatever caused it, to having a major data breach, which could be very impactful to the enterprise. Now let's talk about what is the TrapX does. How do we address this problem? In essence, how do we make sure that the attacker does not dwell within either the cloud or the corporate network, or both, as the case may be? We do so by forcing the hand of the attacker to show themselves, in essence, flushing them out, making them reveal their presence. The attacker, smart attacker, doesn't attempt to reveal their presence immediately when the breach happens. They want to map out the environment, they want to maintain persistency, they want to move from whatever initial point of breach that existed into more valuable parts of the assets and parts of the network. We want to prevent them from doing that. We want to make them show their hand. I'll talk in a minute about how we do that. If we're able to do that, we don't just want to give the security team an alert that says breach, not breach, or possible breach. That's maybe concerning, but it's not actionable. We want to provide actionable information. We at TrapX are able to provide very accurate telemetry. We tell you a breach has happened. Here are the specific assets that are being impacted. Here is the technique in which the attacker is using in order to move. Is he moving through some kind of vulnerable protocol? Was he able to compromise credentials, using that in order to move out? We can actually tell you if it is malware, malicious code, or just a person, or a combination of malicious code and a person. And we're able to feed all of that information into the security ecosystem in order to trigger an automated mitigation action, in essence, kicking the bad guy out. We want this to be an automated process where we identify something and immediately are able to kick out the attacker. This approach has a few benefits, and in essence, we do so by creating fake attack surfaces, what we call traps. We give attackers what they're looking for. However, our traps are not real assets, and therefore there's no damage by the fact that the attacker is exploiting them. So this target-rich environment is very tempting to an attacker. There's not, malware would definitely go after it, but there's not a lot of attackers that could kind of hold themselves. They see a high-value asset, they don't know what's real, what's not real, and therefore they would touch that high-value asset. That raises the alarm. This is very effective because you can detect threats that are not fully understood, even if it's malware that doesn't have specific attributes, or even just an insider that's using legitimate credentials. you can detect those because you don't need to rely on a signature or rule-based approach or an anomaly-based approach, which is just roughly trying to understand past known behaviors and based on that predict future attacks. You can actually predict future attacks that you don't understand today. This is true for outsiders, hackers, but also for malicious insiders, as well as is highly scalable across different types of environment and device types. The two elements that we introduce into the environment are what we call bait and traps. A bait is a clue for an attacker, false clue for an attacker, telling him that there is some asset out there that he is interested in. Think about this as chumming the waters. So in essence, what we're trying to do is interfere with the attacker's reconnaissance process. We're socially engineering the bad guys, what they always do to us. So if the attacker is looking for traffic to figure out where the asset that he's landed in, what is it communicating to it? He's looking for stuff like database connections, anything that he would be looking for in order to figure out, okay, I've landed in this part of the network or in this this area of the cloud, and he's trying to figure out, okay, where have I landed and where do I go next? And we're telling him information, however, that information is false. And the purpose of that information, this is passive data configuration. We're not interfering with the real assets. The purpose of the information is to divert the attacker away from wherever he would go originally, assuming a high-value asset, into our set of traps. A trap is any kind of network-connected asset, anything that has an IP in essence. We can create a trap. Camouflage does that thing. So think about stuff ranging from servers and web servers and applications and databases to more unique type of equipment like switches or some kind of proprietary application. So our purpose is to create this facade, this tempting attack surface for the bad guys. And as we do that, we wish to do that at scale because of several reasons. First of all, the cloud is about scale, so we want to be able to scale this out. And if many of you are thinking in their heads, all right, is this a honeypot? And the answer is no, honeypot did not scale. So this was legacy honeypots and people that provide kind of the box-based honeypots of the world. That's essentially a research tool that's meant to set up a small number of decoys. Our approach is we want to automatically continue to roll out a large number of traps throughout the network because we want to be able to scale out and scale down, and we also want to be attracted to the attacker. And the way to be attracted to the attacker is to be out there in every single segment of the network with a fairly large number of traps that are out there. Let's talk about how do we deploy those elements out there, the bait and the trap. First of all, we have a process to quickly understand what the environment looks like, and we collect that information to provide visibility, but also to be able to, based on that, create the types of baits and the type of traps that make sense within that environment. And this would really make the difference with a human attacker. So malware may be more kind of stupid, would just go after any kind of asset that it can go after. However, a person would ask himself a question, would ask himself, okay, is this asset interesting? Does it have the same naming conventions and other things within the environment? So we're able to figure out what the environment looks like. And then we automatically deploy our traps and make them, camouflage them as what else is out there in that subnet. So think about a subnet that only has a certain flavor of Linux servers. So we want our traps to be that certain flavor of Linux servers. Think about another subnet that has only users in it, that we want to be, Windows in it, that we want to be those Windows servers. And if there's a mix, we want to be that mix. And also in some cases, we want to have less security than the real assets, or more security than the real assets. So we want to have something that's realistic and compelling within the environment. And we want to bait, lure the attackers into our set of traps, so we automatically blanket whatever initial point of entry could exist, for the most part, various workstations with those clues that would lead the attacker to think, okay, here's this asset that I can go after. And while I keep talking about this as individual traps, it is also possible, and actually some of our customers do that, to create whole networks, whole fake networks. So think about a whole area of the network which is actually fake. Again, this ability to scale, and therefore an attacker moving, and again, he doesn't know what the real production assets are and what's a fake one. He's going to tackle that, touch that, and therefore be essentially be flushed out. And the purpose is really to be able to do this automatically. So as soon as you spin up a new instance, we want to be completely deployed within that environment. As soon as you spin it out, we want to roll back everything that we're doing. This architecture is made possible due to a few elements. Essentially, this is built around TrapX's core IP, which is our ability to emulate assets. So TrapX has this powerful emulation engine, which is able to spin a huge amount of traps with very little computing power. It's really a ratio of about 1 to 500 on average. So with the computing power of, let's say, a standard Linux server, we can actually deploy 500 traps out there and be able to distribute them throughout the cloud. We do not require any change to the network architecture. We do not interfere in it with anything. No agents are involved. Obviously, no hardware. We're talking about cloud. And this ability to spin those traps very quickly and then spin them back in case this instance goes away is really what provides the ability to quickly and automatically deploy within the network. The three use cases that we focus on when we talk about cloud is the ability to detect, obviously, breach into the cloud itself. We do so by either spinning up whole subnets of fake assets or just putting some fake assets within certain subnets and seeing if anybody's touching them. Another use case that we look at is being able to detect a scenario where an attack is actually starting from within the corporate network and moving into the cloud, and we do so by essentially putting the right type of bait on any workstation within the network that would have cloud connectivity, in essence, fooling the attacker to touch our traps versus the real cloud assets. And finally, we are able to detect if there's any movement between segments in the cloud. So in essence, if you have, let's say, a segment that's less secure, maybe even exposed to the internet, and we put traps out there in a more secure segment, you can actually see is anybody trying to actually move between those two segments. So that's obviously a very high value alert because it's telling you that your policy of network segmentation, your security policy, in essence, is in some way broken. This approach has been proven out many times. I encourage everybody that's interested to go to trapx.com/labs. There's a number of interesting reports out there, essentially proven case studies. By the nature of things, we're not able to publish everything that we find due to customer sensitivity, but when we do get some approval from customers to publish, either named or anonymously, we put it out there. And it kind of speaks for itself, this volume of case studies, the fact that this has been proven time after time, not just in the ability to detect periods, but also in the ability to detect attacks that were undetected by other tools. And this really is where the unknown comes into play. There are a number of tools out there that could detect effectively generic known signature type of threats. However, the unknown, which is essentially this whole bucket that we call 0 days, and also misconfiguration, right? There's not a lot of tools out there that can tackle with the fact that humans make mistakes. This is really where the value comes out, because you get not only visibility that you may be able to get with larger investments, but also visibility that essentially you would not be able to get from any other tool that's relying on signatures, that's relying on rule-based, that's relying on this very noisy approach of anomaly detection. I want to share a case study, one of many. This was a customer, a very large enterprise, And essentially, they were looking for exactly what I mentioned before. They wanted us to tell them about anything that was unknown. And specifically, they had certain, they had a production environment that was very sensitive, and they didn't feel that they had visibility into it. This was joined between, this was a hybrid environment where some stuff was on-prem, but a lot of stuff was out there in AWS. And the system did just that. We had 2 detections within actually the first day, 12 detections across the first week. So a lot of stuff that they did not know about before. This was malicious code. This was malware. And because it's highly automated, because of the ability that, because the footprint is very low, we were able to deploy 100 sites within the first month. And this is global sites. So think about the limitations of things that need a lot of tuning or require hardware. Because this was so easy to deploy and doesn't really require any changes to the network, any kind of agents, it was immediately out there. And you have here one of the alerts. I'm not sure if it's coming through clear in the webinar, but you can see source Eternal Blue. So this, in essence, is Petya. An instance of ransomware, one of the many detections that the system was able to provide just in the first week. We invite all of you outside of the case studies to look at some more technical information in our website by going to TrapX.com, and there's this little search box, and just click cloud, and you'll get the list of our white papers, research, and other technical things within the cloud environment. And as always, of course, you're also welcome to contact TrapX either through our website or at info@trapx.com. With that, I will open it up for Q&A. So, Michael, I see that we have a few questions out there. Let's take the first one. What scales are you already deployed at? We are already, okay, obviously I can't give exact numbers, but we are deployed at one of the world's largest private cloud networks, and also in public ones across a lot of instances, essentially from China to India, Egypt. We are out there in terms of, I think, probably thousands of subnets at this point. We tend to look at things in terms of like segments in the network. So huge scales. And the cool thing about the DeceptionGrid is, even if you're deployed to those large scales, everything can roll up to a single management console because it's a very quiet approach. We don't generate a ton of events. If you're getting a TrapX event, then you probably need to look at it, because those would be rare, they would be in high risk, and they would be very specific. So we don't tell you we think that statistically there may be a risk here. We show you something that's very detailed. Somebody just attempted to run an exploit against this web server, this trap that is camouflaged as a web server. Somebody just logged in via SSH to our Linux server. Somebody just took some of this fake, supposedly sensitive data that we put out there and is trying to push it out. This is very specific, very interesting. If there's a binary involved, we would capture that binary. This is information that's very binary. It's either an alert and true event, or it's not. So it's very easy to see an attack is actually happening. I'll take the next question. The question is, how is it technically deployed as an image, and how much, and how many traps can a single image support? So yeah, so I talked about appliances. A TrapX appliance can support up to 500 traps. This would equal essentially an image. And think about the size of your own presence in the cloud. In essence, you would not need a lot of those machines, a lot of those VMs, even to cover a fairly large presence within the cloud. We talk about just putting, it's enough to put a few decoys out there in a certain subnet, and immediately you get that visibility. Another question is, you mentioned support of private cloud. Can you elaborate more? Sure. For instance, when I talk about public, obviously AWS, Azure, and the likes. When I talk about private, think about something like KVM OpenStack, so essentially an enterprise large enough to manage their own cloud. We would also be able to support that. We have images for AWS, we have images for Azure, but we also have KVM images for OpenStack. So in essence, whatever the environment is, it's the same solution, and we're just able to package it in the appropriate way for that environment. We have this approach of having a single management console, and it doesn't really matter what the sensor is, what the appliance is. It would still roll off its telemetry to the centralized console where the data would be correlated. Another question is, can you describe or provide an example of how an attack that spans corporate network and cloud can be detected? All right, so great question. So let's think about this in terms of Ori is the DevOps of TrapX. Part of my job, or a lot of what I do, is to connect to our cloud of choice, which is, we use AWS, we use Google, we use a couple of things, to connect and manage the various things that TrapX manages in the cloud. If my endpoint is breached, either because I was foolish and answered a spam email, or the guy sitting next to me, and we share the same, we're in the same network, was foolish and entered and answered a phishing email, or because of a more sophisticated type of attack, or because even that there's somebody malicious inside that was able to gain access to my computer. Without TrapX, the attacker has a fairly straightforward path. He needs to figure out how Ori is connecting into the cloud, and once he's got the key and the token, he's got the essentially the keys to the kingdom. So it's enough for him to sit on my computer and technically have presence on my computer and then just record what I'm doing in some fashion, or gain admin credentials, and he's able to do what I do, which is perform my DevOps function and manage the cloud, only he's going to, of course, try to steal data or cause damage or whatever he's looking to do. This is life without TrapX. Now think about life with TrapX. Life with TrapX, he would go into my computer and he would find a lot of information that would tell him how Ori, this DevOps person, this fictional DevOps person, manages the cloud. The only difference is all that information wouldn't be true, and he would follow that information. He has no way to figure out what is it that Ori really does legitimately. I know, because that's my business flow. However, the attacker doesn't know that. He's seeing all of those clues. He's seeing fake communication out there. He's seeing fake credentials. So he's following all of that, and he's going to touch not the real assets in the cloud, but he's going to follow that clue into one of our traps in the cloud. And we would be able to tell you, A, Ori's endpoint is breached. B, the attacker is going after the cloud, what specific things he's doing in the cloud. So if I'm trying to, upload a binary out there, if I'm trying to get data out there, all of that, the alert will tell you all of that. So that's a very specific, very actionable alert. As I mentioned before, we are also able to feed that information into other security tools in order to actually shut down the attack. So, which in this case would be to isolate Ori's workstation. If the attack is purely in the cloud, then it would be to, in some way, isolate or identify that suspicious process and shut it down. I see there's a couple of other questions. However, I think we are out of time. I invite everybody to talk to TrapX. Go to trapx.com, send an email to TrapX. We'd love to engage you. I know this was fairly high level, and many of you are a lot more technical. And we've got SMEs that cover various types of clouds that would be happy to engage you. And thank you very much for your time. And we will be following up with more information upon request. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.